We're a group of GenXers learning about our ADHD and neurodiversity later in life. Join us as we discuss interesting clips we find online and how they relate to our own life experiences. Welcome to This Is How My Brain Works.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of This Is How My Brain Works. My name is Krista Gano, and I'm here with Sarah Hines. It's just the ladies today. It's the ladies' day. The guys are out and about. And so Sarah and I thought we would take the opportunity to talk about something that we've been wanting to talk about for a while, which is the relationship between hormones and what's happening with women and ADHD and just how we're learning about it later in life and why that might be the case. So without further ado, I think we're both sharing video today. I'm going to give it a start to start the conversation, and then we'll go from there. So without further ado, I'm going to make sure it's turned up.
I'm going to explain how your periods impact ADHD symptoms in less than 30 seconds. So strap in. Two hormones you need to care about here: estrogen and dopamine. Estrogen increases the amount of dopamine made and decreases its breakdown. Dopamine helps you regulate attention and manage motivation. The week before your period, your estrogen levels drop. Less estrogen equals less dopamine equals more problems.
All right.
I just love hearing the why. It gives me it takes so much pressure off to hear why. I don't know.
Right?
But
it's so simple. And first of all, let's be clear. I mean, I know I've been a menstruating human for decades, but I don't think anybody has ever said to me, your estrogen is connected to your dopamine.
No, I have feelings. I wonder if my doctor knows that.
So I think the thing that is so interesting to me, and I don't know if it's generational with our generation or what, but this idea, well, I know it's partially generational because this idea around your hormone fluctuation being a cause of things. I mean, I've sat in rooms for a long time hearing doctors say that it's sort of hoo-ha and it should be listed next to the space of like astrology and whatever. But I do think that we're now really recognizing sort of like gut health, how important hormones are. But we were brought up in a generation of people that was like, we don't really talk about it. We don't really deal with it. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. And that's just for a normal neurotypical. And now when you're talking about how all of these women our age, like us, who are saying, I can no longer function the way I'm used to functioning, and nothing has changed except menopause.
Yeah.
That to me is something that, and opposed to sort of going like, well, it's because you're getting old and going out to pasture, going like, oh, there's something to think about here in terms of your hormonal, regulation and balance is sort of eye-opening to me in a way that I don't know whether to be thrilled or mad or a little bit of both.
Yeah, both. I'm so ecstatic for my kids and the generation that's coming next to have the chance to just be gentle with themselves because they understand what's going on. But yeah, I can think so. Probably, let me think, 15 years ago, I was in couples therapy with my spouse. And, my husband is very a neutral presenter. Like, in fact, we went last night kayaking as a family with Denver Parks and Recs. Highly recommend if you're in the Denver area. Parks and Recs runs a great kayaking with the critters nighttime kayak thing that you can enroll in. Yeah, $4.50 a person. All gear, everything included.
That's crazy. It's awesome.
Yo, Parks and Recs, you're amazing. But we're out there. Oh my God, and my husband, who I suspect he's never been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure he has ADHD. Sorry, I'm diagnosing you on a podcast, dude. But anyway, he it's like just drifting. And suddenly I look around and I'm like, hey, where's Nate? He's missing. And he had gone into the reeds on the bank and was completely obscured by the cattails. And so like, we went and helped him out. And one of the guides said, oh, he's just so chill. He's like the chillest person. And I was like, yeah, he really is. And that's great so much of the time. But back to that couples counseling, he's so chill. So my sort of exuberance and fast reactions or over the top emotional outbursts, all of that have always been foreign to him, alien, all of the things we as neurodivergent people sometimes feel we're being judged. He, who is so even keeled, looks at me and says, what's wrong with you? Like, can't you just control yourself? Like something's wrong. And so in therapy, he basically was like, therapist to the male therapist, what's wrong with her? And the male therapist says, well, I think that she may have PMDD. And I've never heard of that. And for those of you who also don't know what I'm talking about, it's premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And so I looked it up and I was like, yeah, that's a little bit, but no, it doesn't feel exactly right. Like it often gets, people think it's bipolar or borderline, all of those kind of extreme emotional outbursty type, quote unquote, disorders. And he had me the therapist got me into a study at UCSF back in, the early 2000s or late 2000s. And they got me on 10 milligrams of Zoloft. And what I was to do was to start taking that about a week before I would get my period. And I would take the Zoloft for that week. And then I would stop once my period came, or like a day or two after my period. So basically they were giving me Zoloft for that time when my estrogen was plunging and I needed extra dopamine. And it absolutely worked to make me this very even-keeled person, much like my husband already was. And a number of my friends were like, I can't stand you, dude. You're like a walking zombie when you're doing this. Like, where are you? Where did you go? We miss you. Like, yes. And so basically the cure was this thing that robbed me of me. And while it did treat the symptoms, it didn't really help me. And
So I have
yeah.
two questions, or I've got a question and I've got a thought, because we were talking about this, or we've talked about it before, that, my husband has, who is an artist, has done, instead of treating him for ADHD, very similar, I think, to women, he was treated for depression. I think my husband probably has times where he's depressed, but I wouldn't call him depressive. I think he has, I think it's a lot of the ADHD stuff that he hasn't been able to sort out and hasn't been supported to sort out, to be quite honest. But he's the same way. Like he's tried all of, a bunch of this stuff, and he just, yes, it evens everything out, takes off all the edges, but he has zero interest in making music, which is the thing he does. He has zero interest. He once he was doing it, he didn't walk into the studio for like 60 days. And that is unheard of for a musician who plays every single day of his life. And that's his livelihood. And that's what he's got to, it's what we have infrastructure, goodness sakes, for it. It's like
where he gets his joy too.
Yeah. So it was, so you had a sense that, and I had a sense being on the outside of it, that at first I was like, ooh, this is great. We're just taking the edge off of everything. And then after a while, it was like, I don't even know if I know this person anymore. But you also, as the spouse, don't want to be unsupportive, because you're like, you're sort of like, well, I don't know, are you feeling good? Like, how's it going? You know what I mean? Because maybe that's the new normal, but it is an interesting thing. The other thing I want to ask you about your PMDD is what happens, because I've known other people who have had it. Luckily, that was just not one of the things I struggled with, luckily. What happens with perimenopause or menopause? Do you feel it harder, or is it a relief, or does it stay hormonally there in a different way? Because our hormones still
I'll
fluctuate.
start with pregnancy. With pregnancy, gone.
Interesting.
So, I mean, like it was like being on Zoloft 24/7. I was even keeled, things rolled off my back. I was mellow, happy all the time. It was great. But prior to that, what does my and I don't actually think I have PMDD. I think I have ADHD Rage, and that that when the dopamine is gone, I'm easily triggered. I'm frustrated more quickly. All of like I can't sort of hold it together. And so maybe it is PMDD. I actually think PMDD isn't really a thing. I think it's other things that they've kind of catch-alled it. But how would it look? Someone didn't put back the mayonnaise where it was supposed to be. They left it out and it went bad. And the next day I see that and I had planned to make something and I just lose it. And I rage. I'm completely making nobody's left the mayonnaise out of my house.
No, but if they did do that to me, I would be very angry.
And for those people who hate mayonnaise, let's call it, maybe they left the sriracha. Or whatever it might be, something that is a hiccup in my life. And maybe it's the autism. It's like, I like my patterns, I like my things. So maybe it's when I've got the lower dopamine and the hiccup happens, I rage about it. And I don't stop. I'm like, my sister said, it's like a veil of red drops down in front of my eyes. And I'm just a demon possessed, can't let it go. And I need to just, until it's like that, also that need to be understood. Like, do you understand how terrible this was for me? And it's that whole, I wish that I had the ability to say that, what's the stupid rule? 5 second rule, the 5-5-5 rule. If it's not going to matter in 5 months or 5 years, then don't let it take up more than 5 minutes of your time. Like there's some, I'm butchering it because I can't use that tool, but I've always loved that tool, wished that it could, in that moment, I could bring myself back down. Now, so that's sort of how it presents, is like a dog with a bone on something that has frustrated me and my emotions go overboard. And I attack and I go on the attack.
So when you look at the role of dopamine in terms of the ADHD or the neurodivergent brain and how we're chasing dopamine all the time, right? To get things done, there's that really funny meme of someone who's dancing and she's like just dancing and waiting for the dopamine rush to hit before I get started on my project, and then there was another one I saw where the guy who he's talking about how ADHDers clean, and he's in this really messy room and he says, we lay down until the dopamine hits and we can do it, right? So this idea that we are really chasing dopamine to be functional, and then having periods of our life during having our period, and then later when our estrogen is really shifting as we're getting older and not having the dopamine reserves we're used to having and what that looks like. I am intrigued with, because there's a lot on the online right now around, well, every woman says she's got ADHD now. Every woman. Well, I would really love to pair that information with the information of like, well, every woman has been sort of living in some sort of state of like her just holding on by her fingernails.
We get a dopamine desert every month.
And then we get a dopamine desert for like years of our lives. without and no one, I want to say this, and this is not a knock to my mom who listens to this podcast, but no one talked to us about menopause. Like I talked to both my mother-in-law and my mom. I sort of knew a little bit about what it was with my mom. I don't know if my mother's mother ever talked to her about it. My mom didn't have a great, menopause story necessarily in terms of how long and how she suffered. My mother-in-law acted as if it was like she woke up one day and it was just done. And that was just the case. And so, but I think there has been this sense, before us that menopause was your period just stopped and that's just menopause. There's not this talk like we're talking now about the vital changes to our brain chemistry, to our ability to function, to stuff that we've been able to sort of manage for years that now seems unmanageable. Like that's a new conversation, I feel like, at least in the United States with women. And
absolutely,
I don't know how your mother, if you all ever had
probably autistic. Sorry, Mom, if you're ever going to listen to this, but and so she told us all about it. She's a info dump.
Oh, okay. Well,
she actually got on HRT despite the risks of breast cancer and then developed breast cancer and treated it and kept and continued her HRT. Basically, doctor shopped till she could get her HRT, which I don't fault her for. In fact, I'm like, if it's that unmanageable and horrible to go through, do what you need to do.
But don't you also think it's like, because I went through perimenopause and everybody was like, oh, it's the hot flashes. And yes, hot flashes were awful in perimenopause. But this disruption to my brain chemistry in terms of understanding my ADHD happened well after I dealt with, the hot flashes were nothing.
I haven't had hot flashes, so I don't know that I'm actually
really?
in perimenopause yet. Anyway, what all of this is making me think, one, to your point of we didn't talk about it, we also didn't know. I almost brought a video with someone a male talking about the estrogen's effect on women in our period time. And he cites a study in 2018. That's how recently we've been studying this. So like our mothers didn't talk about it because like, Krista, you were saying earlier, you and we both consider ourselves smart people, but without the information on this, trying to figure out what's going on in our own minds and bodies has been worse than salmon swimming up a dry creek. Like there's just been, the information like the salmon without water. Like there hasn't been the information for us. So my heart goes out to the generations before us who have struggled through this. And then back to that Zoloft. What I will say about taking the 10 milligrams of Zoloft is, and I've mentioned this before, I'm not sure if we've aired those episodes, but we talk about how medication can create new pathways in the brain. And basically what it is like the Zen garden, and it, the medication erases the deep, deep tracks. And so when you hit point A, instead of going into the groove that goes to point B, you have that moment to sit on the hill and go, do I want to go to point B? Or, hey, look, I could go this new direction. And I will say taking the Zoloft gave me an ability to choose new directions so that after I stopped doing it, because I realized I didn't love it, like the way that I would liken it is I was on the Zoloft and they'd have left the milk out and it was bad the next morning or whatever it might be. And I see it. And my first response, it was almost like I was observing myself. I would see the path to go and rage about it. And then I would go, but that never leads well or ends well. That doesn't lead to anything good. So I would stop myself. And it wasn't even like I had to take a breath. It wasn't even like I had to do this won't matter in 5 years, so don't spend 5 minutes on it. It was just, I can do something different. I can observe myself. And so I choose something different. Then when I stopped taking it, I'd get to those moments and it wasn't quite as stark. It wasn't so much that I was observing myself, but it was like I was in front of myself again, but I could see the choices and I could feel the pull towards the way I had done it before, but no, I don't need to do that. So I will say, while I think it was treating the symptom, which is, I don't think it was addressing the dopamine deficit that I was experiencing. I think what it did was it allowed my brain the chance to just not react. It was doing something different. That has been something that I have used to help me manage my symptoms going forward. So
it's so interesting here because I was on Zoloft after my second pregnancy for postpartum anxiety.
What if it was these symptoms, dude?
What if it was what?
What if your postpartum wasn't even postpartum? It's actually just the dopamine deficit or desert, and it's
maybe because they did not treat me for postpartum depression. It was postpartum anxiety. That was very specific for them. I don't know why, but the thing that I found really interesting is because of my space, my area on the neurodivergent scale, is that they said, this is why I find it very interesting how you were given Zoloft, because they said once you start it, you cannot stop it for 18 months. And so the
10 milligrams, I think it's such a subclinical. Anyway, go on.
Maybe. So I just remember I sat in the parking lot of Target And because I had never considered myself somebody who needed to have something like Zoloft. And I sat there and I cried because I was like, what am I going to do? So clearly I was anxious. and, and I called a friend of mine and she was like, girl, I've been on Zoloft since before, like the moment I got pregnant, I got on it. So I was able to, get the courage up to go do it and start it. And then it became for me a pattern that was really hard for me to lay down. Because I was like, it's working. Well, it's because it's that black and white autistic thinking. Like for me, I was like, it's part of my routine. It's working. What if I stop? It's part of my routine. It's working. What if I stop? And so the doctor for me put me on something else, and I had a brain snap. And man, I was off of anything like that. Because I'll tell you, if you've ever had a brain snap, exactly. So when I read the list of side effects, it was like, and if you have a brain snap, get off this immediately and call your doctor. Don't even try to wean, just get off. And I don't even remember which flavor of antidepressant it was. I have no idea. I can't remember. But it's literally as if inside my mind's eye, I could hear a and I could see it was like my brain on the inside went like closed like it went black and then back to seeing, and it was like electrical. And it was almost like seeing an electrical charge in my mind's eye behind my eyes and hearing a zzz. and it was like when you were like, well, what is that? When it happened, I knew exactly what it was. And I came right off the medication immediately. But you're right, like nobody at that time, and I shared this with you before, it's like I was working with doctors and I was teaching communication to doctors. And at the time there was this idea of like, oh, that all that talk around hormones, it's kind of crazy. I don't think there was the power behind it that we have it now. It's like when a woman would walk in and say, can you do a hormone check on me, a hormone panel? Doctors in general, there was a period of time where doctors in general would be like, oh, come on, you're going to be one of those wackadoos. And it was that, and that's how it was sort of talked about. And now that is, changing. But my journey has bridged. I've seen us change from going like, oh, that's nothing to, oh, there might be something there. And it's so I just feel like in this whole walk of neurodivergence, I've always missed the research. I've just always missed it. They didn't, this idea, like when you said, well, I don't, until 2018, they really weren't looking at what this looks like for women. That's because until the late 90s, they just considered that whatever the research was for men, it just could duplicate over into the human body of a woman, because
I've told you this part, right? I've told you this part. So they would, when they were studying estrogen, they studied it on rats, or I'm not sure, mice or rats, lab rats. And they decided that it was too complicated to study it on the female rats. So they studied it in males.
Come on.
So our studies on estrogen historically have been the effect of estrogen on a man, because it's too frustrating to study it on women or females because it fluctuates so much in the month. They couldn't get good results. It was too hard.
And they wonder why we have rage.
I mean, yeah, a little bit. When I looked up, Zoloft is typically prescribed in 100 milligrams, but up to 200 milligrams, maybe even more. So that 10 milligrams.
So you had a little bit.
Was but I felt it profound. I mean, it, like I could see it, I took it.
Yeah.
And I'm just grateful to know that it's not me being crazy, that it is all in my head, but it's the hormones in my head, not just made up thoughts.
So as everyone who might be listening to this is wherever they are on this, I want to be clear, like I am so new to this aha moment that I have not walked into a doctor's office and said, hey, can we check my hormones? I have not.
That's why I
done that yet. Yeah. So tell me about that.
Female gynecologist.
Recently?
Yeah, in the last May of this year. So we're in
okay
still. So within the last 6 weeks, and said, you know, am I in perimenopause? What's going on? Like, can we check my hormone levels? And she said, no, because they fluctuate so much. It's not, like the readings are basically meaningless. So I don't know what.
So what do we do with that?
Listen, please help me understand why there's no way to find out if I'm in perimenopause. It's just symptom identification. So she's like, once you're having symptoms, then we can treat the symptoms, but there is no knowing that you're about to go into it, or like, it seems crazy making, but.
Well, and you're, what is it? Like a friend of mine who's a doctor told me, she said, you're only in menopause one day. Because you're in perimenopause before, and then once your period stops for 12 months, the day that you have not had your period for 12 months, so you're in menopause, and then after that, you're postmenopausal. So the goal of not having a period for 12 months, for 1 year, is where we are on the thinking. And then I don't know, what does that mean? That you just have like no estrogen anymore? We're just sort of like sent off into the Julia Louis-Dreyfus the last fuckable day.
Oh, no, please let that
is that sketch, like, is that the moment that you're like, oh, I'm gonna go have a picnic with Julia?
Well, see, my problem is they're medicating me to not have my period. So I'm on the birth control pill, the Mirena, whatever, 24/7. I'll never know when it stops. So based on what they're saying, I'm on the Mirena. I'm never going to have that 12 months because I already do that. And so like so we're not going to test you for perimenopause or menopause because symptoms are going to tell us, but we're going to mask your symptoms.
So then what? Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure the doctors have thought of me and considered me. I'm just going to have faith. You see, Krista can see a deep eye roll for people who because.
Well, no, and I think the shame of all of this, to be really honest, is that I don't, my husband said to me the other day, it's been a while since I've seen a doctor, not like crazy. Like I'm at 2 years. I need to go. But I did have my like breast scan stuff done like this last year. So it's not like anyway. But now at this point, I'm not trying, we're not trying to have a baby. We're not, I'm already at the point where they're telling me I don't need to have a pap smear every single year and, all that stuff. And so as a woman, and I don't know if I experience this differently than he does, but I experience that I'm going to go to the doctor. They're going to tell me I need to lose weight. They're going to tell me that, and when I say that I think my hormones are out of whack, or that I think it might be affecting some undiagnosed ADHD or whatever, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy. They're going to tell me, they're like, I don't feel like, and I have great respect for doctors. I really do. I've worked with them for years. I love doctors. I don't feel like I go in to a doctor's office in this body and am taken seriously. And it's uncomfortable. It feels demeaning. And so it's easier to not, when I can look at myself and go like, I'm walking 6 days a week. Yes, I could lose some weight, but all in all, I'm not having anything big that, I can point to. I go like, why go? Because I don't think I'm going to be heard. And I know that is I'm not unique to feeling that way. So it's hard.
What I would say is, I know that I'm heard because they make good, meaningful eye contact. The problem is, I don't trust that they have the understanding or information. Getting back to, we've been testing estrogen on male rats. We've been, 2018 is when we started to have studies that show a connection between ADHD and estrogen. Like, that's 6 years ago. And we know about scientific research. If it's in the research 6 years ago, it's going to be another 20 before it actually makes it down into the mainstream where people are talking about it in medical school.
And I think that's a reason why a lot of women at a certain age, and I see it in the women in my faith community, that these women who are, are the good God-fearing women, God-fearing Christian women who go to the church every week, whatever, almost all of them, once they hit a certain age, are seeing naturopaths, and they're not going to Western medicine any longer, because there is information that's passed down to naturopaths from Eastern medicine that is more up to date on this time of life than what we have in Western medicine. And I see it like it's so funny because I'll look at like the typical like church lady, and they'll be like, oh well, you should see her naturopath. She tests the strength of her muscles. She's changed her diet. She's like all of this stuff. And in fact, they've guided me to start to maybe step in that direction as well. But it's really interesting to me because these are people who think, oh yeah, no, they're going to stick with their health insurance. But we're starting to have to seek elsewhere because Western medicine is not providing the answers.
Or it's treating symptoms in a way that fog the brain and don't really get to the underlying dopamine desert for my example. At this point, I think it'd probably be a great idea to bring in the second.
We actually have only 5 minutes left.
Oh, maybe it's a good closer because she kind of says everything we've said.
It's great.
But
yeah.
Okay, so yeah, this is from Mind Over Matter with Emma.
If you are new here, I am Emma. I have raging ADHD. I also struggle with premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMDD, which means for at least a week of every month, I don't want to be here and I hate myself and my life. So that's fun. That's really fun. What actually is it? How is it linked to ADHD? It is believed that at least 46% of women who have ADHD will also experience PMDD. Basically, when you're in your luteal phase after you have ovulated, where your hormones just kind of go a bit like, whoa, your ADHD symptoms ramp up then anyway because there's a lot going on. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder is like PMS times 20,000 million. That's a bit dramatic. It is genuinely quite scary to experience. It's like a huge drop. Everything that I've worked hard for feels like it just spirals out of control. Everything feels harder. My rejection sensitivity goes through the roof. My imposter syndrome goes through the roof. And I often self-sabotage in this time where I have conflicts. I pull away from work. I ghost people. And I feel so in despair, essentially, hopeless. And I find it a time where I have to reach out to people if I'm struggling, because otherwise my brain can really take dark turns that make me not want to be present on this earth. Even though logically I know I love my life and I actually love who I am now and what I have achieved, still causes that spiral. And if you struggle with that too, I just want you to know that you're not alone. I'm sending loads of love to you.
But I like the way she describes it, that really hit hard just now rehearing it for like the 7th time. Rejection sensitive dysphoria goes up. That checks out. That's maybe I do have PMDD, or maybe I mildly,
And I think the thing that I think about too is that we can sit here and talk about it from a female perspective all day long, and we certainly have enough to do that with. But men have hormones that fluctuate too.
Mm-hmm.
So, and men, there's, male PMS or whatever they say too. So I think it's important to also recognize that if, that hormones are at work on both sides, and we don't know anything about it there either. And it's an interesting quandary to think about how much our gut health, they're saying our gut health affects like our personality and what we're up to, and now our hormone, like we have completely ignored these systems in our body that are really governing everything about how we move through the planet. and it's so interesting to think we're just at
puppets and they're the strings.
All my little microbiomes, I have like a plan that they haven't talked to me about. But and our hormones and all that, and that we're really just scratching the surface of understanding in those areas. And so I think all of us in some ways can maybe walk away with a little bit of grace for our brains and the way we move through life, because there's a lot of stuff in there we just don't know about that we're trying to learn about.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the Maya Angelou quote how it's been morphed. When you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
when we understand better, we can be more compassionate, would be how I would sort of morph that quote. Like, and that I really love that you brought up men and their cycle as well, which based on my pop cultural understanding, it's roughly 3 months for men that they cycle, whereas we're in a 1 month cycle, they're in a 3 month cycle.
Yeah.
Probably wrong. So somebody correct me if you know. But
I mean, think about it with us. Like, I get clumsier. I can't remember things. So clumsy. I can't remember things.
We call those the time when you have the, how did I get this, Bruce?
Yeah. Like, just, and so we're all, it might be a different timing or whatever, but it is somewhat similar in how we function. And so I think it's important to have some grace with one another and to do studies on female things.
Maybe. Oh my gosh, shocker.
I know.
You're a little too radical for me. I need you to kind of tone it back a little, keep it to yourself.
I know it's crazy.
This by yourself without any information. Do it all on your own. You got this.
Well, if I got to also control all of the systems based on how I walk through the world, then I would say that would be fine. But since I don't get to control the systems of how we get to walk through the world as women, then I think we should at least be studied.
You know what I ran across, and this is my dream world, is, you're gonna laugh, is a world that is run by so let's say we have a village. There's one man in charge, and he governs by grace of a board or council of women elders, and they can remove him like that. So it's almost like a representative, anyway, I don't know, like kind of like representative democracy, where you don't have a direct vote, but you vote someone who then decides for you. But like, I would be fine with men ruling as long as a council of elder ladies could remove him like that. I think that would work.
Women's viewpoints were considered in the
well, I think if a dude could be ousted because
yes,
like,
but in general, it's like how we are over half the population, I believe, in the United States currently, and so it seems like there should be some, dollars sent to like hormone stuff for us.
1 cent of every dollar, I'd settle for that at this point, right? Before,
right,
this millennium, it was 0. Anyway,
so, which is crazy. So before we sign off, I also, because I don't think I ever gave her name. So the clip I shared was from the Psych Dr. MD. You can find her on Instagram, and we'll have her linked in the bio for this show as well. But the Psych Dr. MD, she's awesome. And I think did a really beautiful job at taking something that apparently is so complicated that no one can study it, and put it into something really succinct for us to at least start to understand it.
Yeah, she's someone I have found on the interwebs, and I love her too. She has a lot of great content. So if this clip resonated for you, that first one that Krista shared, I would encourage you to check out all of the stuff that she puts out. And then Emma is Emma Llewellyn, and she's a video creator. You can find her on Instagram. All of this, again, will be in our show notes. So if you're curious about these people, you can click the link and find them there. And she's obviously from England with her adorable accent. So,
which makes everything sound more fun. All right. Well, we've kept you longer than normal. Thanks for sticking with us. And we didn't even in the very beginning say, if you're a man, you can scroll on by. We may just sit through it. So thanks so much for being here.
I hope they did, because you gave them a nugget at the end. And there's a lot of men out there who actually love women and have daughters or mothers sisters, partners who they care about. And this information is helpful. It might help you understand why the women in your life might be struggling at certain times of the month, and to show them some more compassion. So thanks for joining us, y'all. We really appreciate you.
See you next time on This Is How My Brain Works.
If you like this episode of This Is How My Brain Works, please like, subscribe, and share. For more info on today's clip, the hosts, and our podcast, check out the show notes. Thanks for listening.